The golden hues of the late afternoon sun filtered through the towering trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. William Pierce, a successful but lonely businessman, had decided to take a break from his stressful work routine. He often found solace in these woods that bordered his sprawling estate, where the sound of birds chirping and the wind rustling through the leaves helped clear his mind. As he wandered deeper into the woods, his thoughts drifted to his mother, Evelyn Pierce, who had been slowly succumbing to Alzheimer's disease. Each passing day, she seemed to fade further from reality, and the woman who had once been sharp, vibrant, and full of life was now often lost in a world of confusion. William had been grappling with the weight of her illness, unsure of how to ease her suffering. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed movement through the trees. At first, he thought it was just an animal, but as he stepped closer, he realized it was something else. Someone else, a young girl, barely a teenager, was huddled beneath a large oak tree, her clothes tattered and her face streaked with dirt. She appeared frightened, her wide eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. William's heart skipped a beat. This was no place for a child to be wandering alone. Concerned, he cautiously approached her, his voice calm but authoritative. "Hey there," he called softly, crouching down a few feet away so as not to frighten her. "Are you all right? What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The girl didn't respond. She looked at him with uncertainty, her small frame trembling slightly. William could see she was scared and lost. "My name is William," he continued, his tone gentle. "I live nearby. Do you need help? Are you hurt?" After a long pause, the girl shook her head slowly, though she still said nothing. William's heart sank as he realized she must have been through something traumatic. He glanced around, wondering if there was anyone else nearby, but the woods were eerily silent. "What's your name?" he asked, trying again to connect with her. This time, after another pause, the girl mumbled, "Emily." "Emily," William repeated with a soft smile. "That's a beautiful name. How long have you been out here?" Emily didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the ground, and she hugged her knees closer to her chest. William's mind raced with questions. Where were her parents? How had she ended up here? But he knew he needed to tread carefully. The last thing he wanted was to overwhelm her. "Listen," he said after a moment. "I have a house just over that hill. It's warm and there's food. You don't have to stay here. I can help you." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wary but also filled with a glimmer of hope. It was clear that she didn't fully trust him, but her desperation outweighed her fear. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," William said gently, extending his hand toward her. "Let's get you out of these woods." Emily hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took his hand. Her small fingers were cold and frail in his grip, and William felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. He guided her carefully through the dense forest, walking at her pace and making sure she didn't trip over the uneven ground. As they approached his estate, the grand mansion loomed in the distance, its towering structure a stark contrast to the wildness of the woods. Emily's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the house, and William could sense her unease. "It's all right," he reassured her. "You're safe here." They entered through the side gate, and as they neared the front entrance, the door swung open. Martha, the housekeeper, stood there, her expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had worked for the Pierce family for decades. Loyal and protective, Martha had seen William grow from a boy into the man he was today, and she had always treated the house as if it were her own. "William, who is this?" Martha asked, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the sight of the bedraggled girl. "This is Emily," William explained. "I found her in the woods. She's lost and she needs our help." Martha frowned, clearly concerned. "And you thought it was a good idea to bring her here?" "We don't know anything about this girl, William." "I know," William replied, his voice firm but calm. "But I couldn't just leave her out there. She has nowhere else to go." Martha crossed her arms, eyeing Emily skeptically. "We have enough going on here, with your mother's condition. Are you sure this is wise? William sighed, running a hand through his hair. He understood Martha's hesitation, especially with his mother's fragile state. But something inside him told him he couldn't turn Emily away. She needed someone, and perhaps, in a way, he needed her too. I'll take responsibility for her, William said. I'll make sure she doesn't cause any trouble. Martha's expression softened slightly, though her concern didn't entirely fade. All right, she said after a moment. I'll prepare a room for her. But be careful, William. We don't know where she came from or what she's been through. William nodded, appreciating Martha's protective nature, even if it sometimes bordered on overcaution. He looked down at Emily, who was still clutching his hand tightly, her wide eyes darting around the mansion's grand entrance hall. Come on, Emily, he said softly, guiding her inside. Let's get you settled. As they walked through the house, William couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's arrival was the beginning of something important. He didn't know what her story was, but he was determined to help her find peace, and maybe, in doing so, find some for himself too. The days following Emily's arrival, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. The grand halls, usually filled with silence and echoes, now hummed with the quiet sounds of Emily's footsteps and the occasional murmur of conversation. Though the mansion had always been a symbol of William's success and status, it had long felt empty to him, a place of isolation rather than warmth. Emily's presence, however fragile, began to fill that void. William found himself spending more time at home, a stark contrast to his usual routine. Typically, his life revolved around work. As the CEO of a successful tech firm, his days were packed with meetings, negotiations, and late nights in the office. He was a leader in every sense of the word, confident, driven, and respected by his colleagues. But outside of work, his personal life was another matter entirely. Despite his wealth and achievements, William had always felt a profound sense of loneliness, a hollow emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Emily's arrival had changed that. Caring for her gave him a sense of purpose outside of the boardroom, and for the first time in years, he felt needed in a way that went beyond his professional responsibilities. However, integrating Emily into the mansion's rhythms wasn't easy. The house, with its countless rooms, long corridors, and elaborate decor, was an overwhelming maze for a young girl like her. William made it his mission to guide her, showing her the different parts of the house and teaching her how to navigate its intimidating grandeur. This is the East Wing, William explained one morning as they walked to the mansion together. We don't use it much anymore, but it's where most of the guest rooms are. Emily followed him quietly, her eyes wide as she took in the ornate wallpaper, the antique furniture, and the high ceilings. Everything was so different from the world she had known. The mansion's beauty was undeniable, but to her it also felt cold, like it belonged to another time, a place where she didn't quite fit in. William could sense her discomfort, but he tried to reassure her. You'll get used to it, he said with a small smile. It's just a big, old house. Nothing to be afraid of. Emily nodded, but the uncertainty in her eyes remained. Despite her quiet demeanor, it was clear she was still adjusting to her new surroundings. Meanwhile, Martha, the housekeeper, remained skeptical. As much as she trusted William's judgment, her practical nature made her wary of Emily. She had always been fiercely protective of the Pierce family, and Evelyn's declining condition made her even more vigilant. One afternoon, as William sat in the study, Martha entered with a tray of tea. She placed the tray down on the table, then turned to him with a serious expression. William, she began, her voice low, we need to talk about the girl. William set down the document he was reading and looked up at her. What about her? Martha sighed, folding her arms across her chest. I understand why you brought her here, but you don't know anything about her. She's a stranger, and with your mother's condition, I'm not sure it's safe to have someone we know so little about staying under this roof. William frowned. He knew Martha's concerns came from a place of care, but her suspicion frustrated him. Martha, she's just a child. She's been through something terrible, and she has nowhere else to go." "I understand that," Martha replied, her voice softening slightly. "But we don't know what she's been through, or if there's more to her story than she's letting on. What if someone comes looking for her? Or worse, what if she's involved in something dangerous?" William's jaw tightened. He hadn't considered the possibility that Emily's past might catch up with her, but he wasn't about to turn his back on the girl. "Emily is harmless, Martha. She's been alone and scared for God knows how long. The last thing she needs is more suspicion." Martha looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, though her concern didn't fully fade. "All right," she said quietly, "but please just be careful. You're already dealing with so much with your mother. I don't want you to get hurt." William softened at her words. He knew Martha was right to worry about his mother, Evelyn, who had been slipping further into the depths of her illness. But something about Emily stirred a protective instinct in him, something he couldn't ignore. "I'll be careful," he promised, "but I believe this is the right thing to do." That evening, as the sun set and the house settled into its usual quiet, William found himself sitting with Emily in the living room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the room's elegant furnishings. Emily sat curled up in one of the large armchairs, staring into the flames. Her small figure looked even more fragile in the oversized chair, and for a moment William felt a pang of sadness for her. She was still so young, yet there was a weight in her eyes that seemed far beyond her years. "How are you feeling?" William asked gently, breaking the silence. Emily shrugged, her gaze still fixed on the fire. "I don't know," she said softly. "It's different here." William nodded, understanding the difficulty of her adjustment. "It's a lot to take in, I know, but you're safe here. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Emily glanced at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. "Are you sure? What if they find me?" The question caught William off guard. "They? Who do you mean?" Emily looked down, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. "The people from before, the ones I ran from." A chill ran down William's spine. He had suspected that Emily's past was troubled, but this was the first time she had mentioned anyone pursuing her. He leaned forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "Emily, who are these people? What happened?" She hesitated, her brow furrowed with worry. "I don't want to talk about it," she whispered, curling up tighter in the chair. William didn't push her. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he knew that whatever had happened to her, it was too painful for her to speak of just yet. But this revelation only solidified his resolve to protect her, whoever or whatever she was running from. He would make sure she was safe. Several weeks had passed since Emily's arrival at the mansion, and in that time, her bond with William had only deepened. The mansion, once a cold and lonely place for both of them, now carried a different energy. Emily's laughter, quiet but genuine, echoed through the halls on occasion, and William found solace in the moments they spent together. The house had begun to feel like a home again. One crisp morning, William suggested they take a walk in the woods. The same woods where he had found her. He had noticed that Emily was growing more comfortable, but there were still parts of her past she hadn't shared. Perhaps, William thought, returning to where it all began would give her the chance to open up. Emily hesitated at first, but with William's gentle encouragement, she agreed. As they stepped outside, the early autumn air was cool and refreshing. The trees were beginning to turn, their leaves shifting from deep greens to shades of gold, orange, and red. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled patterns on the ground. William led the way, but he made sure to walk at Emily's pace, giving her space to speak if she wanted to. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves under their feet and the occasional rustling of squirrels in the trees. Emily kept her eyes on the path, lost in thought, while William waited patiently, not wanting to rush her. After a while, they reached a small clearing with a fallen log, a perfect spot to rest. William sat down and gestured for Emily to join him. She hesitated for a moment, but then sat down beside him, pulling her knees up to her chest. "This place is peaceful," William said, gazing up at the canopy of trees above them. "I've always found it calming out here. It's where I go when I need to clear my head." Emily nodded but didn't say anything right away. William sensed that something was on her mind, something heavy, and he waited quietly, giving her the space to find her words. Finally, Emily broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to live in places like this. In the woods, I mean." William turned to look at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "You lived in the woods? How long?" Emily shrugged, her gaze distant, as if she were recalling memories she'd tried to bury. "I don't know. It feels like forever. I ran away from a place I didn't want to be. I just kept moving, always looking for somewhere safe. But I never really found it." William felt a pang of sadness as he listened to her. It was clear now that Emily had been through more than just being lost. She had been running for a long time, and the fear of whatever she was fleeing from still lingered in her eyes. "You don't have to run anymore," William said softly. "You're safe here, Emily. No one's going to hurt you." Emily glanced at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I've heard that before. People say you're safe, but things change." William's heart broke a little at her words. He understood now that trust didn't come easily to her, and it would take time to prove that he was different. He wished he could erase whatever pain she had experienced, but he knew that all he could offer her now was patience and kindness. "I know it's hard to believe," he said gently, "but I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Not while you're here." Emily looked down at her hands, picking at the hem of her sleeve. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "My parents, they left me when I was little. I don't really remember them. After that, I was in foster homes. Some were okay, but others they weren't. I ran away from the last one. It wasn't safe there." William swallowed hard, his chest tightening with anger at the thought of anyone mistreating her. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve it." Emily shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't think anyone really cared about me. Not the way people are supposed to. It's easier to be on your own when you know no one's looking for you." For a moment, William didn't know how to respond. The depth of Emily's loneliness was staggering, and it struck him how much she had endured at such a young age. But he also saw her strength, the quiet resilience that had kept her going through it all. "I care about you, Emily," he said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "You're not alone anymore. I want you to know that." Emily looked up at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and disbelief. It was as though she had never heard those words spoken with such sincerity before. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to cry. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," William replied. "I know that you're brave and you're strong, and I know that you deserve to have a family that loves you." There was a long silence between them, the weight of William's words hanging in the air. Emily stared at the ground, trying to process everything. Finally, she looked up at him, her voice small but determined. "Do you really mean that? About me not being alone?" William didn't hesitate. "Yes, I mean it. I've been thinking about it for a while now, and I want to adopt you, Emily. I want you to be part of my family. If you're ready for that." The words hung in the air like a promise, and for a moment, Emily didn't know how to react. She had spent so much of her life running, protecting herself from getting hurt, that the idea of belonging to a real family felt almost impossible. But in William's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in anyone else: sincerity. He wasn't offering her pity or charity. He was offering her a place in his life. Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she nodded, her voice cracking. "I'd like that." William smiled, his own eyes glistening with emotion. Then it settled. "From now on, you're part of this family." He reached out and gently pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to feel safe. She buried her face in William's chest, her small frame shaking with quiet sobs. But these tears weren't born from fear or sadness. They were born from hope. William held her tightly, his own heart swelling with emotion. In that moment, he realized that in saving Emily, he had also saved himself. The mansion, once a place of solitude, would now be a home filled with the laughter and love of a family. As they made their way back through the woods, Emily walked beside William with a lighter step. Though the weight of her past hadn't fully lifted, the promise of a new beginning gave her strength. The woods that had once been a place of fear and loneliness for her now felt like a path to something better. William glanced down at her, a sense of peace settling over him. He had always been a man of action, solving problems with logic and precision, but this was different. Adopting Emily wasn't just a decision. It was a commitment, a promise to give her the love and stability she had never known. As they reached the mansion, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the sprawling estate. William paused at the entrance, looking down at Emily with a smile. "Welcome home," he said softly. Emily looked up at the mansion, a mixture of awe and gratitude in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a place in the world, a place where she belonged. She smiled up at William, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Emily became more and more captivated by Evelyn's story. The mansion held so many secrets, and it was clear that music had once been a significant part of Evelyn's life. Whenever she sat in the sunroom, staring blankly at the world outside, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a part of Evelyn hidden somewhere, waiting to be reached. One afternoon, while exploring an old storage room tucked away in the back of the house, Emily discovered something that took her breath away. A dusty, leather-bound notebook filled with music compositions, all written in Evelyn's delicate handwriting. The pages were old, yellowed with time, but the notes on the staves were precise and beautiful. It was clear these songs had meant something to her. Emily flipped through the notebook, her fingers tracing the faded ink. It felt like she was holding a piece of Evelyn's past, a fragment of who she used to be before Alzheimer's had stolen her memories. As she studied the music, an idea sparked in her mind. She hurried down to the sunroom, where Evelyn was seated in her usual spot, her eyes distant. Taking a deep breath, Emily approached her. "Mrs. Pierce," she said softly, kneeling beside her, "I found your music." Evelyn didn't respond, her gaze still far away. But Emily wasn't deterred. She gently placed a notebook on Evelyn's lap, hoping for some sign of recognition. Evelyn's fingers brushed the cover, but there was no flicker of awareness in her eyes. Determined to try, Emily opened the notebook to a random page and sat down at the grand piano in the corner of the room. She carefully placed the notebook on the stand and began to play one of the pieces, a slow, haunting melody that filled the room with a sense of longing. As the notes floated through the air, Emily glanced over at Evelyn, hoping for a reaction. At first, there was nothing, just the same vacant stare. But then, Evelyn's hand twitched slightly, her fingers moving almost imperceptibly in time with the music. It was a small, almost invisible gesture, but it was enough to make Emily's heart race. She kept playing, pouring her heart into the music, hoping that somewhere deep inside, Evelyn could hear it, could feel it. For a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of recognition in Evelyn's eyes, a brief moment of clarity. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. After the song ended, Emily sat in silence, watching Evelyn closely. Though she hadn't spoken or truly responded, that small movement gave Emily hope. Music, she realized, might be the key to reaching Evelyn in ways nothing else could. From that day on, Emily made it a point to play for Evelyn whenever she could. She practiced the pieces from the notebook, learning the melodies that had once been so important to her. And while Evelyn's responses were subtle, an occasional hum, a soft tapping of her fingers, each moment felt like a victory. The power of music was real, and though Evelyn's mind was lost in the fog of Alzheimer's, Emily knew that, in those brief moments, they were connecting. Despite Emily's best efforts, Evelyn's condition showed little sign of improvement. Each day, Emily would sit at the piano, playing piece after piece from Evelyn's notebook, hoping the music would unlock a hidden memory or bring her closer to the surface. Yet, more often than not, Evelyn remained distant, her eyes blank and her mind far away. It was heartbreaking for Emily, who had grown to care deeply for the woman, even though she had moments where Evelyn's fingers would twitch or she'd hum along faintly. Those fleeting signs of connection faded quickly. Sometimes, after hours of playing, Emily would find herself staring at Evelyn in frustration, wondering if her efforts were in vain. One evening, as Emily sat beside her at the piano, she spoke softly. "Mrs. Pierce, I know you're in there. I've seen glimpses of you. I wish I could help you more." Her voice trembled with emotion. "I believe music can reach you. It has to." But Evelyn gave no response. Her hands lay still, and her gaze remained fixed on something far beyond the present. Emily clenched her hands in her lap, fighting the urge to give in to her frustration. She knew it wasn't Evelyn's fault, but the constant hope followed by silence weighed heavily on her heart. Still, she refused to give up. She believed, with all her heart, that love and music could break through the barriers of the disease. That night, Emily composed a song of her own, drawing from everything she had learned from Evelyn's music. It was filled with longing, hope, and a deep desire for connection. As she played it the next morning, she poured her emotions into each note, her fingers moving with a newfound passion. For a moment, Evelyn's eyes flickered toward Emily, a faint glimmer of something, recognition? But it was gone almost as soon as it had appeared. Emily finished the song, her heart heavy but still hopeful. Though the silence felt deafening at times, she knew she couldn't stop trying. She wasn't just playing for Evelyn anymore. She was playing for both of them, for the belief that love and music could transcend even the darkest moments. And so, she kept playing. Weeks passed, and the mansion was filled with the constant sound of Emily's music. She continued to play for Evelyn every day, hoping to reach her, even if only for a brief moment. There were small signs, an occasional smile or a subtle movement of Evelyn's fingers, but nothing concrete, nothing that felt like a real breakthrough. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed into the sunroom, Emily sat at the piano once again, playing the melodies she had written herself. She had come to love the song, and though Evelyn hadn't responded to it before, today felt different. There was something in the air, a quiet anticipation that Emily couldn't quite explain. As she played the final notes, Emily turned to look at Evelyn, expecting the usual silence. But this time, Evelyn's eyes were on her, not distant or blank, but focused, clear. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn truly looked at her. "Emily," she whispered, her voice frail but unmistakable. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She rushed to Evelyn's side, kneeling down beside her. "Yes, Mrs. Pierce, I'm here." Evelyn's hand reached out, trembling as it found Emily's. "The music, it's beautiful," she said softly, her eyes welling with tears. "Thank you." Tears filled Emily's own eyes as she held Evelyn's hand tightly. It was just a moment, a brief, precious moment of clarity, but it was enough. After weeks of hoping, of playing, of believing in the power of music and love, Emily had finally broken through. For that instant, the fog of Alzheimer's lifted, and Evelyn was truly there with her in the present. "I won't stop," Emily whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll keep playing for you, always." Evelyn's smile was faint, but it was real, and as her hand relaxed and her gaze drifted back into the distance, Emily knew that, even if this moment didn't last, they had connected. The music and the love behind it had reached Evelyn, and that, for Emily, was everything.